Thanks, Gabe. So, folks, you are listening to Gabe Pollock, our research lead and program coordinator here at EC3, the Electric City Culture Council. I want to welcome you all to the workshop tonight. And just going to start out with the territorial acknowledgements. Sorry, I left them in my bag. We take these acknowledgements quite seriously, and it really means a lot for us to be able to take time out to think about where we are and where we're living here in Peterborough and Peterborough County. We're gathered on Treaty 20 Mississauga territory in the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations, which is home to the Williams Treaty's First Nations. EC3 recognizes that the Williams Treaty's First Nations have been the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters for countless generations, and that they continue to do this work today. We're grateful to be here and have this opportunity to learn more about their knowledge and traditions. We commit EC3 to work supporting their work and doing all we can to further real efforts at truth and reconciliation, which includes providing support to Indigenous artists and creating a space for their voices and their work to be seen, heard, and respected. And one of the greatest joys that we've had over this past year has been working with Sarah Lewis, who you might have heard of. She is the first Peterborough Poet Laureate and is a member of Curve Lake First Nation. So Sarah will be with us in the live event on Thursday at the Peterborough Public Library, and I know she's here in spirit with us tonight. Okay, Gabe, can we let the slides roll? The idea to have a poet laureate for Peterborough has been around for probably 5 or 6 years, and it puts Peterborough in good company with cities all across the country, at both the municipal or both the local level and the provincial level and the federal level, sort of reviving that ancient tradition of poet laureates. It really gives the city an opportunity to support a new vision, a new voice, to shape the identity of a city, and definitely adding grace and substance to official civic occasions. It's a really creative way to acknowledge the value and importance of the arts, particularly the literary arts, and to bring that creative voice to so many more events and to get citizens thinking about who we are, why we live here, and what it means. And certainly have felt that a couple of times with Sarah Lewis's presentations at City Council, and she presented and apparently knocked it out of the ballpark last night at the inauguration of the new City Council. So poet laureates have a kind of a burden on their shoulders, I think, from now on, to live up to what Sarah has done and the image she has created for poet laureates. But we think you'll have a good time doing it. Thanks, Gabe. This position is called an honorary position because that's part of the tradition. It is funded by the City of Peterborough in the sense of the overall fee of $2,000 is provided to the poet from the city. And the Electric City Culture Council, that's our city's municipal arts council, we worked with an advisory committee to develop the program and the criteria for the program. That was approved by the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Advisory Committee, and the committee and finally City Council endorsed the position and the funding of the position last year as a permanent project to enhance our civic identity, acknowledge the excellence and outstanding achievements of professional poets, and just generally bring that literary voice to our life together in the city. There were 2 local poets who you might know. They are spoken word poets, John Hedderwick and Wes Ryan. Both have been really central to the spoken word poetry movement and to the creation of slam poetry events here in Peterborough. They had the idea, they did a lot of the initial advocacy work with the city. And finally, the funding for the program was negotiated with the City of Peterborough by EC3. For a while, the city thought they would like to have a poet laureate, but not pay them. And we were able to make that a proper paid position, as it should be. And as I mentioned, Sarah Lewis went through the process and was appointed Peterborough's first ever poet laureate last year. And she's had a really, really active year, not only speaking at official city events, but almost as soon as we announced her appointment, we began to get a flood of calls and emails from schools and service clubs and youth organizations and women's organizations asking if she would come and speak to them and present her work. And as you can see on the slide, she was able to do that at 70 particular engagements. And that's a beautiful picture of Sarah taken out at Trent University. So I think I've sort of mentioned a lot of what's on this slide already. It is a program supported by the City of Peterborough. We always have the EC3 logo, the city's logo, and the beautiful logo for the Peterborough Poet Laureate on all of the documentation for this program. And we do work closely with the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Advisory Committee, which is a committee appointed by, well, there's an appointment process, and it always includes me because the director of EC3 is an ex officio member, and Justin Million might be another person who you would know, Jeff Macklin. A number of artists in the city applied to be on that committee, and we've worked with them and loved working with them over the last 4 years. Thanks, Gabe. Want to take some time to talk about equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. We do take our work in that area quite seriously, and we want to welcome people who may have barriers or challenges to our program. Filling out application forms, understanding how the process works. And we make Gabe and I available to help any artist who's finding the process challenging, help them get an application in and help them make sure their application is as complete and robust as possible. And we are doing the in-person workshop with Sarah, and her nominator, Jeanette Platana, will be there on Thursday at the library, and you'll be able to get paper applications there and hand them back in there if you don't have access to computers. And we've, been really fortunate to have very creative folks advising us on diversity and inclusion, and we've figured out ways to help people in any number of manners. You'll see that same kind of diversity and inclusion reflected on our juries every time we possibly can. And as I said, we hope throughout all parts of the process, if you have any questions, just contact EC3 staff at electricitycc@gmail.com, and somebody will get back to you and lend you a hand if you need it, or if you have accommodations that you require. Okay, so we're on to the program description now. And this program description was developed on the basis of quite extensive research that was done about other poet laureate programs. And then with the guidance of John Hedderwick, Wes Ryan, and a couple of other people from ACHAC, from the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Advisory Committee, that served on a subcommittee, actually honing the application process. And hope that we don't confuse you too much by saying application, because your application is actually a nomination made by someone that you know. So people can't nominate you without you knowing, and you can search out any nominator that you want. And it is an honorary position, and often people think that means that you don't get paid. You do get paid, but it is a position where we expect the poet laureate to be an ambassador for the arts, be an ambassador for the city, and help us all do a better job of knowing and understanding the place where we live. Thanks, Gabe. It is a one-year term, and this year it'll run from January 1st to December 31st. Approximately. It'll depend a little bit on when we have the jury and when we can actually announce who has been appointed. And as I said, there's an honorarium of $2,000. We pay that out usually in 2 or 3 installments, and we will also act as the poet laureate's agent and help out in terms of other organizations that would like the poet laureate to perform, to present at events. Will help negotiate an artist's fee for them. The requirement is 4 original works that are created and presented at official civic events during the term of the poet laureate's tenure. So this past go round, Sarah Lewis presented at the opening of the first council meeting in the fall of, was it in the fall of 2022? I sort of forget, whatever that first council meeting was. And then there was another one. She was at the Civic Awards. And then last night she presented at the inauguration of the new city council. So who do we think of when we think of a poet laureate? It's definitely important that it's someone who thinks of themselves as a professional literary artist and who has, a good grasp of presenting poetry in live situations or spoken word art, reading your work, speaking your work, and you have to have work and I think an articulation of what it means to live in Peterborough. I think that's good there. Good. Thanks, Gabe. A lot of the research that we did said the same kinds of things many times, that part of the goal of having a poet laureate and a poet laureate program is to help shape civic identity and placemaking. And we know that there's not only one image of the history, there's not only one history of the city. So definitely the strengths of a poet laureate and a poet laureate program is to bring different and varied and new perspectives that reflect the multiple communities as well as the individual residents of the municipality. Sarah's work was very, very strong in that aspect, as was the work of the 3 shortlisted nominees. All of them had spent time in their previous work reflecting on our experience in the city of county of Peterborough. Doesn't have to be about the old days. It can be about contemporary experience, and your work can also explore our future. So just do a little bit more reinforcement of what the roles and responsibilities of the poet laureate will be. We do try to bring the poet laureate into National Poetry Month in April, and then a minimum of 3 other official municipal events. COVID has had a big impact on what the poet laureate did and how and where and when. So a lot of Sarah's work was done on Zoom, and even poetry workshops that she did. She would speak at length to us about how to design those kinds of workshops, because it was really different than the live kind of workshop she'd done in the past. And we are excited about the fact that at the end of her term as poet laureate, she had created, and we had been able to put out into the world a total of 4 new works and 4 public readings just on the civic events side. If you go to the EC3 website and click through to Poet Laureate, you'll see a couple of examples of her work and a couple of videos about her presentations. A lot of the work that Sarah did the last time round were requests from schools, requests from community organizations to do workshops, and it's totally up to the Poet Laureate what invitations they accept and which ones they don't. And as I said, we can provide support for these engagements. I have to be honest, I was pleasantly surprised that I don't think we had anyone call trying to book Sarah for something who wasn't prepared to pay an artist's fee or who we had to press on it. I think that's one thing that's changed over the last few years, that more and more organizations realize that artists have to be paid for their work. We do liaise with city staff, particularly the arts, culture, and heritage staff and the communications staff at City Hall. And there was a written report provided at the end of Sarah's term. The legacy project it can be almost anything the Poet Laureate wants to do. Sarah chose to do a series of workshops exclusively with young people, and she worked quite closely with Peterborough Slam Poetry to do that. And she set up some mentorship experiences for aspiring poets. Other Poet Laureates that we researched created archives of their poetry and the poetry of the people who had come before them. There's a lot of different things, but we do hope that something that the Poet Laureate does will have a life after that poet's legacy. That's the legacy of their taking up the position. And they will sit on the Poet Laureate Selection Committee. Thanks, Gabe. So we do a lot of the down in the dirt, on the ground work for the project, for the program, in taking the applications and nominations, reviewing them to make sure they're complete, registering them, and following up with the artists if we think they need more information or if anything's been left out. And then we organize and select the assessment committee, and we run that assessment committee. So we have skilled staff who've been doing this kind of thing for a long, long time. And maybe one thing I'd say about that is last year we brought in a Poet Laureate from another city, somebody who knew Peterborough quite well, Lillian Allen, and Lillian sat on the jury. And we may have somebody from outside of town again this year. I'm not sure. We'll have to take a look at who applies. And we usually have a formal event with a media release and other things, just depending on where the COVID restrictions land us, to make a splash when the Poet Laureate is finally appointed. Now we're going to talk about the eligibility. What things have to be there so that you can actually cross that threshold and be eligible for the program? Well, we need an artist, and we hope that's you, who wants to be a Poet Laureate, and a nominator who puts forward the artist's name. So you can't nominate yourself, but you can certainly, and I think most applicants do, find somebody who will nominate you. And you can't be nominated by someone without you knowing it. You have to sign and say that you're interested in participating in this program. And I think that it was really clear the last go round that the strongest applications were those where the nominators and nominees worked together on the process. Vaughn, how are we doing? Do you have any questions so far? Oh, I lost my chat room. All good. Okay, thanks. So you do have to be 18 years of age or older. You do have to be a resident of the City of Peterborough, Peterborough County, including Curve Lake and Hiawatha First Nations. You'll see that the application form asks you to show evidence of that through a tax bill or gas bill or your driver's license, something that has your address on it. You do have to be a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident, which is a legal status, or a person upon whom refugee protection has been confirmed, which is also a legal status for new Canadians. And you have to be legally entitled to work in Ontario. I think one of the things that's hardest to explain, but is really important, is that you're ready to accept the responsibilities of this position as a poet laureate. You do have to be accustomed to public presentation, citizen engagement, and community outreach, because the kinds of offers, I guess is the word, or engagement or connections that happen with the poet laureate may require you to work with groups where you don't know everybody, where the organization might be new or unfamiliar to you. So the assessment committee does look for people who they think can, communicate and engage with a really broad cross-section of people. We do look for a professional history from the poet laureate. There's a set of eligibility criteria for spoken word artists and a slightly different set for page poets. And you have to be able to demonstrate that you've made a considerable contribution to poetry. So have you produced a chapbook or had things published in Arthur, or been part of a poetry slam, or, poetry collective, and have a sense of being part of the literary life of the municipality or the surrounding region. Thanks, Gabe. So if you are a print or page poet, the nominee must meet at least one of the following published criteria. So what do you have to have under your belt to be eligible? You'll see that in a minute, but who decides? It says published text in the criteria. Who decides whether that work counts as a published text? It's the selection committee. So any of the applications and nominations where it's not really clear how much public text published text there's been, we put those to the jury first, and they'll determine the eligibility. But once we get into the next couple of slides, you'll see what is needed. So if you have one book of poetry published by a literary or trade publisher, so most of you will know what is meant by that. It's an independent publisher with its own apparatus for selecting and then editing and publishing literary works. Or you can have one self-published book of poetry that's been marketed professionally and distributed, and that's one that we might take to the selection committee. Or two chapbooks that have been professionally marketed and distributed as determined by the selection committee. So if you are a page poet, you'll know that long and lovely tradition of the chapbook. And it's really important that you can demonstrate to the assessment committee a body of work that shows your professional commitment and proficiency, and includes poetry published or presented in professional markets. And we put markets in quotes because certainly the last go around, we had applicants who had formal books that had been presented by publishers. Other people had videos of being part of slam poetry competitions. Or you may have publications in literary magazines, in zines. It can be something very formal, a journal, an academic journal, or it can be a community-based chapbook. Thanks, Gabe. So we do ask you to outline your publication history and your involvement with the poetry or arts community. For some people, that may be poetry readings in bars, poetry readings at Trent, poetry readings at the New Canadian Centre, or at the library. So we do want to see what your history of publication is and what your involvement with the literary community has been. And in your support materials, and there's a really good checklist in the application of what kind of support materials you have to present. We can include examples. You can include examples of your work. So you really want to take a look at the work that you've produced. Think about it in relationship to the idea that you're going to be poet laureate, and choose the works that you think best reflect that aspect of your practice. So a lot of people gave us advice on how to constitute eligibility criteria for spoken word poets in relationship to page poets or print poets. And again, we're looking for things that show your professional commitment to the practice. So it is an opportunity for people who are a little bit advanced in the field, and where the selection committee can really get a strong sense from your work of what you might bring to that honorary position of poet laureate. But there are some specific things for spoken word artists. You could present a recorded studio album, participation on a spoken word team, including touring individually or competing for at least 2 years. So if you're part of the spoken word community, we probably don't need to explain to you that a lot of the creativity and the results of that community are demonstrated in competitions. And to kind of make things balance and be as similar as we could get them, you have to have 3 curated featured performance sets of at least 15 minutes each in a slam poetry event. That can be a slam poetry event or spoken word event from anywhere. Some of you will, while you're primarily spoken word poets, will have print material, including chapbooks, anthology contributions. We noticed a lot of people have been applying in our grants to individual artist programs for money to move their works from spoken word and on into printed poetry books. And we're looking for some demonstrated commitment to the community through teaching or creating performing spaces for artists. So how are you involved in the literary arts or any aspect of the arts in Peterborough? Thanks, Gabe. This is where you and your nominator can work closely together on sketching out for the selection committee what your performance history has been, what your involvement with the spoken word arts community has been. And this is a really critical one, is that to include in your application links to the audio tracks or videos that the selection committee can listen to or view online. We'll certainly review the application, make sure the links are working, work with you to get them fixed if they're not. But I can tell you that the committee definitely takes a serious look at everything that you submit. So it does matter what you choose to include. And this is the eligibility for nominators, very similar for nominees. But you do want to be nominated by somebody who's quite familiar with your work and can shine a light on it, comment on it knowledgeably, and comment on your ability to undertake the duties of a poet laureate. So are you that kind of person that can go and speak at the Rotary Club, or teach a class on spoken word to a group of grade 8 students, do something with the folks at the New Canadian Centre, out at Curve Lake or out at Trent? That's you know, really having that kind of flexibility to do different things. A nominator can only nominate 1 artist per year for the poet laureate. So if you might want to check about your nominator, just in case they're not aware of it, but they can't nominate 2 people. Thanks, Gabe. Okay, so a really important thing to keep in mind is that there is an application available online. That's how to go at it. It's on our website. As I said, we'll register and review and put all of those nomination packages in front of the selection committee, which functions like any arts council jury would. And they shortlist in the first go round 3 people. And those 3 people then are interviewed by the committee, probably through Zoom right now. And in that interview, everybody's asked the same set of questions, and you're asked to present 1 or perhaps 2 short pieces so that the committee can get a sense of how you would perform as a poet laureate. So every nomination package includes the same thing, and this checklist appears somewhere in the nomination form. So there is a form to fill out. We want to look at your CV or your resume, but something that really talks about and illustrates quickly what your achievements are, any formal or informal training you've had, any experience that you've had, again, reading your work or publishing your work. And it's that kind of combination of performance capacity and quality of the page work or printed work that they'll be taking a look at. The confirmation of residence, and the letter. So a great letter can make a big difference, and a poor letter just may not be able to overcome, no matter how fantastic the support material is. So you do want to look at somebody who feels passionate about your work and who is comfortable writing about your work, and trying to get everybody else as excited as they are about your work. Thanks, Gabe. We do give a fair amount of leeway for the artist who's not nominated. That was something really important. A lot of applications these days really want to limit how much artists are allowed to say when they apply for something, and we decided to give people 750 words. You don't have to have a 750 word letter of intent, but it was really interesting the last time round to hear the voice of the poet through that letter of intent that says what you're hoping to do, why you want to do it, how you'd engage with the public, how you might work with the library or any other cultural group or community-based group in the city, and how you might use digital engagement and social media platforms to interact with the community and advocate for the arts. So that could be just that you end up doing performances on Zoom, but you might want to create videos or games or any digital tool that you want to use that would bring your voice as the poet laureate, your ideas, your creativity, your vision to the public. Thanks, Gabe. So the application does ask for a minimum of 5 examples of work over the last 10 years, and that's spelled out in detail in the guidelines and the application form. And we'll show you at the end, just reinforce our website, and on the website you'll see a dot around circle about the Poet Laureate program. You can click on the slider when the Poet Laureate program piece goes by, and everything can be submitted online. And an artist bio, maximum of 250 words that says who you are and what you've been doing in the field of poetry. Okay, I'm just going to check in any questions. Okay. So every single nomination is reviewed by the selection committee, and those jurors will approach every application in exactly the same way. These will always be people who have achieved some kind of excellence in the field. There is, and we're required to have a city representative on the committee. Last year, it was Andrew Iamaki, who works at the Art Gallery of Peterborough, but he's a writer as well. And we can be free to also invite teachers or educators, people who are really knowledgeable about that space of poetry and spoken word. Teachers, educators, last year it was Gordon Johnson, who taught English at Trent for a long time and is a published poet himself. And the previous year's Poet Laureate. So it is true, just as I said, the selection committee will choose 3 finalists for a short list, and those 3 people will be interviewed. I can say with confidence that any of the 3 people who were shortlisted last year would have made great poet laureates, but there was something about Sarah Lewis that stood out for the jury and selection committee, and that's why she was selected. Thanks, Gabe. Okay, I think we've nailed those. So we do advise the members of the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Advisory Committee. We're in a kind of a funny year this year because of the municipal election. That advisory committee that we call ACHAC, this go round, the mayor has decided to extend the appointments of the previous advisory committees. So advisory committees are appointed, members are appointed once every 4 years. When the election happens, there's an appointments committee who you can apply if you want to be on an advisory committee, and they recommend to the mayor who should then be on the advisory committees, and then we work with that committee, ACHAC, the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Advisory Committee. Okay.
Sorry to butt in, Sue. I just wanted to mention one thing. We mentioned it earlier in the meeting, but a bunch of this is written about online applications, which is true. That's the primary way to accept applications. But starting Thursday, we will have print copies of the nomination form at the Peterborough Public Library. We'll be giving them out during our workshop there, and they'll be available after that. So people can also pick up a print copy there and also drop off a completed print copy at the library as well. Just wanted to note.
Thanks, Gabe. So these points just illustrate how a selection committee or a jury work. There'll be at least 5 people, and they'll be gathered together, whether it's virtually through Zoom or in person, and we'll go through all the applications, usually in alphabetical order. And there's a really kind of rigorous, I think, and serious process that takes place. We would definitely do a conflict of interest check on everyone who's on the jury. And the discussion happens at a pretty high level. I know lots of times people think, particularly in grant juries, that it's a lottery, or people just give money to their friends, and none of those things are true. It's often very agonizing decision that people make. And I facilitate the juries. Gabe does all the management work on the juries and selection committees. And we do work towards consensus. And so far, we've been fortunate. We've never had to grab a majority vote. People make their arguments and talk about the pros and cons, take a look to be sure they're really clear about the eligibility as well as the adjudication criteria. And if the committee doesn't find someone who they think would be a great poet laureate, they can reserve the right not to make an appointment in any given year. So here are the things that the committee will be looking at. So when you're filling out your nomination and you're talking to your nominator, you really want to talk about these things. What's been your contribution to the field and the impact of your work to date? What is the quality of your work in relationship to the expectations of the position? And we're going to be looking for somebody who has had significant and outstanding achievement. In terms of citizen engagement, do we have evidence that you can accept the responsibilities of the position based on what you've done before? Have you done lots of public presentation, other kinds of citizen engagement initiatives or community outreach? And are you a person who will create enthusiasm for the program? Many nominees, of course, have big dreams of what they can do in the position. And the committee will look at whether or not your proposed program of activities beyond the required 4 presentations at city events are realistic, achievable, and relevant. Do they make sense with the kind of work that you've been making and with the goals and objectives of the program? So the key date coming up is December 16th, and the nominations are due no later than 11:59. Some computer god comes down there and shuts everything off. And then the appointment, more or less, January 1st to December 31st. If we sort of follow the pattern that we took last year, probably the first civic engagement would be the first time that City Council meets formally as City Council. So not the committee of the whole, but the formal City Council meeting in January, which would be late January probably. Okay. So what we've talked about so far is what's needed in this particular program, what your work has to cover in terms of your letter of intent, your nominator's letter, and the background information, and of course, the examples of your work. But we have some tips and tricks for you that work to improve the application for any grant or position like this. So we're just going to take a little breath and go into what things should you keep in mind when you're working on this application. Check the deadline, start early, start earlier, start now. So that is advice from Kate Story, who's a well-known playwright and actor and writer in the city, and all of us have worked in arts organizations for years and applied for organizational grants. You can't underestimate the amount of time a good application takes. So even if you start tonight, it's a good idea because you want to go over it and go back and forth. And I just wanted you to take a look at this picture because it's the work of Sue Lily Dixon called A Quick Trip to the Store, and it was part of a program we did in 2020 when COVID hit called Arts Week Shift. And Sue has she has experience in theater and now visual art, and this is a part of a series of photographs she did around the city. She uses a wheelchair. Thanks, Gabe. Read all the guidelines, even though it can seem wordy and boring. It's our responsibility to make sure we're really transparent about everything that's going to happen in the process, what particularly the eligibility criteria and the selection criteria are. So it can seem a bit overwhelming at first. If you need to read the guidelines through a second or third time, don't be embarrassed, just stick with it. It's like writing a test or an exam. Read the questions first, a couple of times, and then crack into the application form. And this is a work by a painter named Bethany LeBlanc. And this too is part of Arts Week Shift too. She does a lot of work with buildings and architectural features in the city of Peterborough. Answer the actual questions the nomination asks. So a lot of times it feels that people go off on a tangent, or you can tell that they're thinking that people will know everything about them or know everything about their work, but you shouldn't assume that. You should pretend you're talking to people that don't know you and don't necessarily know your work, and make sure that you and the nominators speak to the quality, the value, and the intent of your work. And the photograph you're seeing is, it's actually, it's a log. It's the end of a log, a big piece of wood that Wendy Trussler did as a project, where she burned the wood with her CV, I think it is actually. This is a great photograph of a piece that Kate Story and Ryan Kerr developed for Arts Week in 2018. It was a dance performance at Peterborough Square. And don't be embarrassed, and make sure you leave enough time to write several drafts of your nomination if you need to. We always recommend to people that they write things on a Word document first, and then when you've got it the way you want it and you've checked spelling and you're feeling strong about it, then pop it into the application form. Don't try and do rewrites in the form itself if you can avoid it. Thanks, Gabe. Oh, these are some people involved in the Poetry Cart, which is a great Peterborough project that EC3 has funded a few times for Arts Week. This year we funded it at Pride, at Art Loves Pride in the fall. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen it or taken part, but you can go up to any of the poets in their cart. It's a little cart on wheels, and they have a menu of poems, and you can order a poem a la carte and take it with you. But those poets can write things as long as they want. For the application or nomination form, there are word counts, and you have to stick to those word counts. So again, do a draft in offline and then save it, print it. I always recommend to people that they do a final check on paper, because in my experience, people's eyes see things in print that you just don't see on the screen. And then when you think it's great, dump it into the application. And I think this was a poetry reading and a slam poetry event that we did in 2020 downtown. Believe it or not, I think that was a November day. It was a mild November. And I just love that this artist is reading everything off their cell phone, but you can't use your cell phone to apply. So be clear and concise. Avoid jargon and art speak, even though some of the people on the committee may be critics or curators or academics. I find what works best is plain, clear language in any grant application or application for something like a poet laureate. Get help. I think that's one of the most important messages we could get across is work with your nominator. The two of you might invite a third person to just look things over, get some feedback on your first draft, and absolutely get somebody else to proofread and double check the checklist so you make sure you've got everything and you've got it in good shape. This project, the Flying Canoe, is going to reappear at the opening of the new Canoe Museum. It's by Jennifer Elchuk, otherwise known as Opal. Make sure you pay attention to that checklist. Make sure your information is accurate and up to date. Don't leave out an important performance that you just did the week before. Give us everything you've got. And I can see some well-known spoken word artists in this picture. It must have been colder at this event because everybody's wearing jackets now. If you are deaf or hard of hearing, we can assist with your application. And just keep in mind that we're here to help. There's no question too small. There's no confusing situation that we haven't seen before and that we won't do everything we can to help resolve. So with all of those things in mind, did anybody else come, Gabe?
We have one more person in the room as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if anybody else has questions, feel free to ask them now. This presentation will be available, as Gabe said, on our website afterwards as a recording. And Trent Radio is also going to record and is going to play the recording too.
Yeah,
Not
that's
sure
right.
what the dates of that are, but they're going to.
And we'll also make the PowerPoint presentation which accompanied this this talk also available on the website as well if people want to read along.
Any questions?
Hi, one quick question.
Yes, hi.
I am not sure if you saw my message, Gabe, but I was asking if that website is the Electric City website.
Yeah, so it's the Electric City Culture Council. So it's EC3, THREE.org. And you can also link to it from our Facebook page. We're also on Twitter and Instagram as well. But
Okay,
yeah,
thank
the
you.
Electric City Culture Council. Should also pop up if you Google us as well.
Thank you.
All right. If there aren't any other questions, we'll just say goodbye. Thank you very much for coming, and we really look forward to getting your applications or talking to you and supporting you in making them.
Yeah, and we are also very much available if any more questions come up. You can email electricitycc@gmail.com. All right, well, thank you very much for coming, everyone.
Take care. Thanks, Gabe.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you tomorrow.